This conference will now be recorded.
So welcome, FSPA members, to the Branch Transformation Committee, the next session of the Struggling Salesman Future Bank series. We're here today with the usual crew. And one of the things that happened when this Branch Transformation Committee was formed was we talked about the FSPA members and what we could do to move this technology forward. There seems to be 3 levels of knowledge among the FSPA members. There's people that really couldn't define branch transformation if you asked them to. They're not really sure what it is. There's people with incredibly advanced skills and experience, like some of the people that are on this committee. And the rest of the FSPA members seem to fall someplace in between. So the idea was to set up a series of webinars and sessions to help the members see the trends, understand the expectations, build a toolkit. So in our last session, we talked about how to qualify your customers. Every customer is unique. Every customer has different needs. You have, as a salesperson, limited resources. How are you going to invest your time? Where are you going to spend that precious resource? How do you qualify the customer to make sure you're not wasting their time and yours? And so we went through that. We went through how do you prep for that, the prospectus, dealing with the customer, making sure they're ready, setting the benefits expectations, making them understand this is about change management, changing many aspects of not only their physical branches, their processes, their people, the jobs. So we got to that. And then the next question came up was, what is the process to get to success? Where do you start? So to start us off today, I'm going to pick on Adam Jordan. What do you see as your first step? Now you've got this contract, you've got this going. How do you get to where you need to be?
So I think it's important from my experience in kind of moving from that qualifying stage to more towards like a solution development or defining what it is that you're wanting to accomplish. I think it's important to do several different things. One, I think you really need to define who your champion is. Who is your customer is a different group of folks and stakeholders and roles within the organization. So really determining with that, with that prospect or client, who it is going to be your really primary person. I think that is one thing that I've seen is really making sure that you understand that from the very beginning, and who's the person that you can go to in a one-off scenario to accomplish what you need to do through the solution development stage. Usually that person's some type of, depending on the size of the organization, it could be the CEO if it's a small credit union, or it could be an analyst, a project analyst, or someone that's been tapped with, we want to do this project, this person's a project manager, we want to get that person to head up the efforts here. It could be someone in IT, probably if this is like their first, usually IT comes in a little later, but you just want to make sure that you figure out who that person is and understand, what that person needs, and think about what's, if they're given this assignment, they've got a lot on the line personally and in their career to make sure that this is going to work for the institution. And so really understanding that and understanding what their needs are, and really building great rapport with them. I think I'll kind of stop there. That's kind of my first thing towards success. I mean, I've got some other pieces that I think are really critical, but I certainly would love to hear from the rest of the committee on a couple of other key things once you qualify. And sometimes you may have already done this right through the qualification process, but
are you talking about the most senior person or the person who's kind of in charge of this project? How are you finding out who this is? What do you do to determine who this is?
Well, it's more of art than science, I think. I think you want to, it depends on where the lead came from, right? If this is an existing customer, if this is, if this is a cold call and you've determined that this is an opportunity, or maybe this was a referral from someone. Those are the different types of things. It can vary. So I think that's not a great answer, but it's the truth. It just really depends on what this actual scenario is.
And sometimes, BJ, it's who's asking the most informed questions. It kind of percolates to the top, and so you'll start focusing in on that person, where you can actually have some very good conversations along the way with that person. It may be not the person who started the process, but they have the drive to see this through and make sure that they understand the solution and all the things that Adam was talking about.
And sometimes it's the person that signed the purchase order. We just ask them directly, who is the main point of contact, because it's probably someone that reports to them, and obviously it depends on the size, like Adam was stating, is just asking them, who would be their main point of contact, throughout this. And one of our best practices is, once you've kind of qualified everything, you're moving forward, is I like to restate, what the KPIs are, what the ultimate goal. So, I mean, in a very simple way to ask it is just, I want to make sure that we make sure this project is successful for you, for your branch transformation strategies. So at the end of the project, what are your success measurements? And we really kind of state that with the project plan of, here are the 5 things we're looking to achieve, and make, you talk through that in the sales process, but just kind of reiterate that to make sure there were no internal discussions that happened that maybe we weren't a part of in them signing the deal. And we know what we're walking into for those, hopeful outcomes.
Makes sense.
Following on to what Adam and Lindsay both said, really, I think the most important thing is to make sure you truly understand whose job is most likely to be impacted by the outcome, whether it's positive or
bar.
Oh, okay.
And
They wanted me to be there to position it, because they would have them squeezed in.
Somebody's
needs to mute.
Yeah.
The room you wanted. Do you have a webinar you're attending?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll make this quick.
Okay, it's all right. They're just kind of doing the, stuff.
Joe, could you mute yourself,
Wait
please?
for everybody to get there.
Uh-huh.
I wondered if you saw the news last night. 2 ATMs in Dyke.
Chad was telling me about that.
Joe,
They got
you
ripped out.
mute, please.
Please.
They I think got into the fascia,
EJ, are you able to mute Joe?
pulling one out with a car.
Can they show pictures of them?
Very briefly and from a distance.
There we go.
All right, good.
Okay, thank you. Like I was saying, just try to find the person whose job is most likely to be impacted, whether it's positive or negative, because that person's going to be critical to your success, and you're critical to their, I think, developing that relationship early and rushing it often is critical. The other thing I think to make sure is you truly understand the need in fine detail. I mean, you've already done this through the qualification process, but take another step back and take a more wider angle view of the problem set and make sure your solution truly aligns and fills the gap. If there are little gaps in places where you can't solve the entire solution, entire problem, I should say, work with your stakeholder, this person that I'm talking about, who's most likely to be impacted, make sure they understand there's a gap that needs to be filled by somewhere else, and that's where maybe you bring in a partner. I think in our last call, Nick alluded to making sure you're leveraging partners as needed to bring in solutions that augment yours to make sure you're filling the entire need.
Yeah, I think so. I want to clarify. So I started my initial answer thinking about the process of pre-close, right? Pre-contract. And I think you're, in my mind, when I'm thinking qualifying, that means that this opportunity has been qualified to pursue as a potential win. And I think I don't know if we want to go the direction of, are we talking about winning the deal, or are we talking about success of the project? So I guess just for my own point of clarification.
Well, I took it to mean the success of the project, but I guess you're right, because we didn't handle the quote and getting through that process. I mean, and I think when Joey brought that up in the last session, I took it right to mean, how do you get to a successful implementation? But you got to get the order first, and we were talking about qualifying prospects. So I think it makes sense to back up and pick up with that sales process and getting all the pieces aligned so that you win that order. So again, having that person inside that's the proponent that can spread the goodwill is a key piece of that. And what else do you need to do? What else can we do to make sure that we get this order and are able to move forward?
BJ, the way I think about it is some of this is applicable pre-sales and post-sales. And what we're doing is we're selling a solution here. So a solution is not something that we're going to put in a box and just ship it out the back door. It is something that we have to have participation in all the way through the process. So me explaining what does my post-sale plan look like in a pre-sales world helps qualify me as a proper solution salesperson, or anyone here on the panel here and their prospective products. It looks a lot of times just exactly the same, but we're just talking about it in generalities in the pre-sales aspect of it. And then the post-sales, we're going to get into the details. And if they see that I am well defined before they sign on the dotted line, and then after they sign on the dotted line, then it's going to have a very high chance of success.
I agree. When we're talking in the first session, we talked about, helping the customer first. Was you're educating the customer as the first step of this process, making sure they understand what it is exactly that they're getting into, because we talked about the ones that know they want branch transformation, but they really don't know what's involved in it. So you don't want to sell it without having done that homework and setting that expectation with them. So it is about helping the customer understand that once this starts, it's going to touch every area, and those areas have to be prepared and they have to be involved all along the way. So,
and sometimes we have to define what our piece of that branch transformation story for them is. I mean, we may not be the 100% solution of what they think is truly branch transportation or transformation. We're talking about, different components for different solutions for different prospects here.
Yeah.
Isn't it a fair assumption that we're talking projects, but how often does someone actually win a project for branch transformation? Isn't it something like win a project for, say, video update or for TCRs or ATMs? And it really isn't our job to go in, and once you get that initial, project for one piece of it, say, and I heard this before, so I mentioned it, a wider view saying, all right, so you're updating your video, you're updating your ATMs, you're updating your TCRs. But have you thought about this? Like, what is your strategy for branch transformation? Probably say, well, we really haven't thought about it. And then that's where we come in our expertise, say, well, if you're doing this piece, then you really should think about this piece, and you think about this piece. And that's how, to me, we add value to it.
Yeah.
Lindsay, and you're a perfect one to speak to that, because I mean, each of us have our niche, but you're all encompassing here.
Well, and I think this goes back to multiple times, it's been mentioned about the different partners that you can bring in. And so we rely, heavy on that piece. When you look at it, we go in and we really do start with, what are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? And that oftentimes starts with the pain points, of, what brought your conversations up initially? What made you start looking at branch transformation? And so when you start qualifying why they're having those discussions and why they've even reached out to you and, why they're looking for maybe TCR upgrades or, whatever it may be, they're looking for, say, efficiency. We oftentimes lead with case studies with examples of, here are some, results you can achieve, but, you need to look at these other, pieces to it. So, if you're looking to move to a pod or, a dialogue tower, are you going to do away with cash drawers? And if so, are you set up operationally wise for that? So it does. I mean, I agree. It leads into all the other conversations with that. And oftentimes that leads to conversations about resource limitations. And this is where I feel like everyone involved here could really help them achieve what they need. You can be that trusted resource for them to talk through, well, I don't have anyone that can manage the project internally when we get to this step, or I don't have anyone that has experience, with implementing video tellers. Being able to advise them at that point, then to me makes it more of a full branch transformation strategy. And I think it starts with all those needs identifying questions of just, well, how did you get started in this discussion? And what are you trying to achieve? And that kind of grows from there. And that's what I think builds, closer to getting you to that sale, because you're not a salesman. You're becoming a trusted advisor to them, and you're helping them walk through their thought process and all their concerns.
So when they, we were talking last time, everybody has the dreaded phrase from their customer of, get me a quote, right? So what's your response when they say that?
Sometimes it depends on where we are in the process, first and foremost. But most of the time we have to get to that trusted advisor, as Lindsay was talking about, we have to examine ourselves, our competition, and make sure that they feel like that they are making the proper choice. I mean, yesterday I had one, and I said, I am unsure if I'm the proper choice for you here, because it's my job to make sure that we are the best fit for them. Ultimately, yes, I want to sell them a product. Don't get me wrong. But I do have to look at it that if I'm not the best fit now, I may be the best fit in the future, or where that person changes and goes to a different job. And they say, that person was a trusted, they gave me some good advice, and I want to talk to them again. And so you always have to look at your reputation. Your reputation means more to you than anything else out there. And so you make sure you guard it and you give proper and honest feedback and opinions.
Anybody else have anything that they like to do to get to that step?
I can tell you some of the things that we do in video side. And I'm not in sales and product management, but I tell you what our sales guys do, and I get involved in. A lot of times we'll basically have a conversation with a bank, and this is around analytics, and they're like, yeah, this sounds good, I think, not really sure. Like, well, give us a branch. Let's set up in one branch, you try it out, and then we spend time with them, make sure it's working right. And then they make the decision. Either they really like it and they give us the PO, and that turns into a project, and say, yeah, it's not really what we thought it was going to be. So I would say find a seed branch, ask the banks to give you a branch and set up something. It might be an investment in your part. Maybe you have to give it for free. Maybe you have to do the install for free, but it's a potential. You spend, your resources in one branch to win 10 or more, et cetera. That's something we do on the video side.
Yeah, we were talking about that on the first session, about the idea here is not to get that one, it's to get the enterprise rollout, and how do you ensure success so that comes as a piece of it. And one of the ideas that came up that I thought was really clever was the idea of putting a 360-degree camera in a really good branch and in a not so good branch, and then sitting down with the customer and reviewing, why is this branch doing better than this one? What is it about it? And using that to start the dialogue of what needs to change, what needs to be improved, again, if they pick a non-performing branch and they add branch transformation, it's probably still going to be a non-performing branch. And I think that's the risk, doing the first rollout and the customer isn't aware of why one branch is successful and one isn't. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I was just going to add, sometimes I think it's also who you're influencing along this decision-making path. We find with what we do, a lot of times it's facility directors, right? And so we're talking to them, but once we start getting folks from like marketing and IT and customer experience management and people involved in the process for something as, seemingly as simple as a sign, all of a sudden the whole dynamic changes. And now we've got multiple stakeholders for something that can impact their business, right? And I think that's one of the keys too, is you have to be able to understand who those other stakeholders could be, as minor as they are, to make sure that you're influencing them along the way. Because if you're not, you're leaving some big holes in your whole process, whether it be pre, post, during the process, it doesn't matter. You got to make sure you understand who those people are and find a way to influence them to get them on your side.
And one thing not to be afraid of is make sure that you bring people in, your experts, that you because it's very hard to answer all the questions that come up through these solution selling process. Make sure that you have Dan, Adam, Sonny, whomever, that you can bring into the conversation to help give that customer that feeling of success throughout this whole process, to make sure that we're giving them at the proper time.
Hello?
All right, somebody's joined.
Yeah, hi BJ.
Hi BJ, this is Dave. I apologize for being late.
Okay.
BJ, if they could mute, we're getting feedback.
We're getting a lot of feedback. Are we clear? Okay. One of the things that I wanted to talk about as well is the question, because some of you know I was involved with recycler installations back when we thought it was installing a piece of hardware. One of the things that interests me was with the issues with HR, which often is what makes or breaks you, is the people. Lindsay talked a lot about getting HR involved in that step. And they never did, in any of the things that I was involved with, get involved until it was almost like done and installed. And then the resistance would start. They saw the recycler as, eliminating a full-time position, or somehow or other, no matter what you tried to say or what you tried to do on site, it seemed like it was a threat to their job security that technology was coming in. And Lindsay talked about the change management, how it changes their jobs. We learned early on where I was that it was, the head teller was a big key to your success. The head teller who controlled everything, controlled the tellers, controlled the teller line, was used to doing a certain way, a little bit stereotypical of, the middle-aged woman that's been running this with an iron fist because of the chronic teller turnover, not wanting to get involved with something that she wasn't completely confident in. And if we didn't win her over, we didn't succeed. But we never got to the point of saying to HR, this involves you, this involves job descriptions, this involves maybe incentive plans, it involves the type of person you're hiring. And again, we never got to that point until it became a crisis, and when we realized, this is a problem, or it's not going to be going well. How do you bring up that idea that HR needs to be involved in the buy-in of this before the contract's ever signed? is, and in your discussions, this seems to be a delicate subject.
I think it's always a delicate subject. When you talk about changing people's roles, I think sometimes you have to be hesitant to go too far into that in the sales process, just because then it may feel like a very daunting, task. Oh, we didn't realize it would be this complicated. Well, it's truly not complicated. We typically do that, in the sales process of just talking through, have you thought through your project plan? Oftentimes we start that with the timeline and, when are you hoping to implement, said technology, whatever it may be that we're discussing. And, that's an aggressive timeline, or, okay, that's achievable, having those discussions. And, can all of the critical partners be available to support that timeline? And sometimes that leads into them asking you, well, who else should be involved in the project? And if it doesn't, you can kind of baby step them to that and talk through that with them of just sharing. And it may not necessarily have to be HR, job descriptions definitely does. It depends on the technology that they classify branch transformation as. But, talking about with the head of retail, have you talked through any change management components? Because while recyclers can provide a ton of efficiency, you can cut your transaction time in half, balancing can be down to less than 2 minutes at the end of the day. You talk through a lot of these quantifiers, but, there is some fear that comes with this from the employees. And so, we really do recommend that you start out with sharing them, why you're making the decisions you're making. And we kind of talk them through that. And I'll be really honest, when you share a lot of the common pitfalls in a very just kind of delicate manner, obviously not, scaring them out of the project, oftentimes that leads you to become their trusted advisor. It leads you to be the one that kind of gets that leg up to moving to the closing of the sales cycle, because you've been through this before, and you can kind of share with them, make sure you have some of these conversations early on, make sure your trainer is prepared. And have them start with the WIFM principle, the what's in it for me. We're implementing this technology to allow you to be able to have better quality conversations with your customers and not have to worry about accuracy. And here's some of the benefits that'll come out of it. And sometimes that alleviates that fear through the process and helps move you through the sales cycle at the same time.
And one of the things,
those are all. I'm sorry. This is Dave. Those are all great points. And I would just add, I think it kind of maybe has the opportunity to bring the bank back into talking. What is your strategy here? I mean, it should be linked to the strategy, right? From one example of, is this just a strategy of efficiency and we can do more with less, or are you looking to evolve the teller roles? And both of them have a bit of a different track, and should have a little bit of a different communication plan. So I would just add that to all of what was just said. There's always a good opportunity to bring in a strategic element, and that means you should be talking to the right people in the bank, right?
Yeah. Yes.
and one of the things that Adam talked about a little bit earlier to make this a success is find your champion. Find who is the person that's going to walk boldly to that new technology, whatever that happens to be. And you hear the comments, oh, this is cool, or you mean I can do this? And you start identifying with them throughout the process, and then see if they're the type of person who can help bring this to their customer base, I mean, their users, because they are an inside person and they are adapting to the technology and the process and all of these kind of things, and they will become your champion, and they will help explain whatever you're trying to get across to them in their language, in their tone, in their verbiage.
I think almost as importantly as identifying your champion is you have to understand, you have to look forward down the process and say, who's going to be my blocker? So, right, you got to find your champion, and you also need to identify your blocker very early on. And what you do with that blocker, I mean, there's some strategic decisions to be made with them. I've always found that you're really practicing your listening skills with that blocker is going to go a long way. Let them be heard. Make sure that that you're not afraid of their voice, and that you're also responding intelligently to whatever it is that they're communicating. Because a lot of times the blocker you can be a blocker for a couple different reasons, right? And I think the other piece of that is find out why they're the blocker. Are they threatened? Did they have a bad experience with this at another financial institution? Are they mad that they didn't get the promotion and your champion got the promotion instead? And so they're going to be willing to sabotage the whole thing. So it's trying to understand, not only who your champion is and who your blocker is, but why your blocker is that person and why they're playing that role is very important. And getting them involved, give them some ownership. I mean, it depends on how much defense they're playing, but I think you really need to know who that person is as a general rule.
Joe Petulot put a comment in that he typically makes several calls to talk about the concept before he delivers a proposal, and advises them that they need to prepare the tellers before the technology arrives, and that allows them to kind of head off that pushback because they're aware of it. That the big problem is when the customer really isn't thinking about the pushback that could happen. So thank you, Joe, for that comment. All right, so you found your blocker, you've got your champion. What's next? What are you looking for next? The physical property, IT? Where do we go next?
Process and documentation we want to make sure that we have all of our forms, all of our understandings going into this process. And then once you have that, then you want to set up the call. You want to have a pre-installation call. You want to talk through the process. You want to answer the questions. And that's kind of the next step in my process.
So Joey, when you're talking about the documentation, you're doing a teller training manual,
I am understanding the environment that my product is going to be installed in, asking all the proper questions, making sure that I have all the proper people lined up to when it does become that go live date or that installation date, we're ready to go. We have our resources. We've advised everybody of here's the things that we're going to focus on these particular dates at these particular times, and making sure that they feel comfortable, because guys, we are all, I guess the best way to say this is we're emergency room doctors. A gunshot wound walks in, we don't get upset, we don't get frazzled by it, because we've done it 1,000 times. We've dealt with every kind of gunshot there is, or whatever the problem is, but they're going through this probably for the first time. And so they need to be comforted throughout the whole process, and making sure that they understand what's going to happen next. Do they feel like that this is handled properly for their organization, to implement that process in a way that's going to make them feel comfortable and look good through the whole process?
Yeah, I think it's super important. So we work with a lot of different folks from a professional services. So we don't actually sell our product, but we'll be hired for professional services to help with implementation. And the process there is really can be very clunky, because you've got different players that need coordination. So I think from as I've recently been working in that professional services coordination and handling a lot of that, I would just identify it as, there's some pretty hard and fast rules that need to be done, some prerequisites that you really need to check the box before anybody steps on their doorstep with any kind of hardware or software, to make sure that everybody's ready for what's going to happen. They understand, this is what's going to happen in this time block. This is what's going to happen in this time block. In order to get to that point, I need you to give me these pieces of IT information. We need to understand, where this is physically going to be placed I mean, I can't tell you so many times the bad projects or ones that I've seen or have been brought in to help solve really comes down to a lack of robust project management from the solution provider. And somebody needs to be the leader of the process and bring in the right parties. But that person needs to understand each player's part and how it impacts the other so that the coordination can happen seamlessly. Because ultimately, if you're the solution provider and you're the one that's got the signed contract from the customer, if you don't have that in-house, if you don't have that knowledge in-house, you've got to take steps to get to that point, whether that's training, whether that's just shadowing folks that are people in the industry that do it well, or maybe it is actually bringing in somebody that is professional services that does this, that you can sub out, in other words, a lot of that work. So I think the success of the ultimate enterprise rollout is so critical in that first implementation or that pilot, that you've got to have the right players on the field, and you got to have the right planning going into it.
Agreed. Anybody else on that?
This is Dale. Just the only thing I'd like to say is when I go out to do something, I make sure that
Dale, I think we lost your audio.
Oh.
Try it now.
That it's on. Is it on?
Yep, it's on. We can hear you.
Okay. All right. So what I try to do is I try to get the person I miss.
No, you're muting back out again.
Yeah, if you start talking, it goes lower.
Okay. I'll talk a little slower too, louder. But when I start the process, I take the person that I work with to the first branch and have them work with me while I do the installation work so that they can see firsthand as to how this product works. I also give them the thermal gun and I let them play with it. You'd be surprised how much they interact with you. You give them something to do. And then they can see themselves, oh, yeah, look at the difference between here before and after. And to me, that seems to always work. That works great for my product. So that's what I do, is make sure that somebody is there that I worked with from the beginning on at least the first shot. And I've had other banks that I've done for. I said that I would stay in the loop. I will not step offside the loop and just pass it on to a dealer. If there's a problem, I'll be there. If I need to know about something, you can call me at any given time. So I make myself readily available. To me, that works.
All right. So have we reached the point then that we're comfortable with this? Is there any other qualifications? Any other? So we're putting in a test site. We've got everybody involved. We've got our processes and documentation ready. We've had a kickoff call, right? So we've tied up all the bits and pieces and we feel like we're in a good place. So what's next? machine arrives on site, branch renovation starts?
All of the above.
Hey,
I mean,
BJ, this is Dave. I guess maybe I missed that, so I apologize. But one additional would be, every new install at a new account is probably more of a pilot than not. So sometimes getting clear alignment and documenting the objectives that the bank wants to accomplish sooner than later, and like I said, documenting it is, and then deciding on how we're going to measure it is critical as well, right? And it kind of has an effect of moving a lot of the subjectivity to it, because the lead teller is still kicking up a fuss, but you have objective data to say, well, here's what we've been able to accomplish, and here's the metrics that we agreed to based on those objectives. So I hope I didn't repeat what's already discussed, but I'll add that.
Hey, this is Sonny. I'm sorry for the echo. There's one. The name teller came up several times, and I think that, you know what, the audio is bad. I'm going to be able to talk. Sorry, bad echo.
Okay.
So BJ, if we're picking up in the process of, machine arrives on site, you've got a good plan, you know who your people are that are going to be doing X, Y, and Z. I can't think enough about how critical the actual end user training is, and making sure that they have a full commitment to not only getting everything, whatever it is, name the solution, whatever it is, installed well and operational. That's a no-brainer. That should be a we shouldn't have to talk about that. But making sure that they've got the right people scheduled that are going to be there. And I don't know if this is where you're going, Sonny, but making sure that your head teller is actually going to be there. The person that's the person that's going to manage this on a day-to-day basis, making sure that person's not on vacation, and then making sure that person has a backup. You need to have more than one person. We've been called back to do retraining numerous amounts of times because they decided to train one person to do whatever it is that that they were implementing. And so you want to have a backup. You want to have that contingency plan. And then the end users, getting them comfortable. So by the bringing them donuts, or I don't know what, getting in their good graces, getting them to and getting real feedback. Push them on it. When you're doing the training is, well, ask for clarification, right? Ask clarifying questions to make sure that they're retaining the information, but then also say, well, what do you think about this? I'd love to hear some really candid feedback. This is a safe place. If you hate it, I want to hear it now, because we want to no shame, right? Embarrass me, right? Embarrass my product right here, right now, because I don't want to hear about it 30 days from now when the CEO is calling me up and saying, we're kicking you out of here, you're done. I want to hear about it now. And so making sure that you get that feedback and address that, kind of like the blocker, right? In the sales process, you need to know who your blocker is on the implementation side as well.
Yeah.
And one thing you often need to do sometimes, to kind of add on to what Adam was saying, is make sure they have time to focus on the training that you're providing to them. I mean, I don't know how many times we've been out there and they go, yeah, we got it. And then the next week after we're left, they got no clue as to what we were telling them. They question everything. And so you have to make sure that they have time to focus on it. So one of the things that I like to do is to make sure that, if possible, that the stakeholder or the person who's going to do the training, the ongoing training, possibly to their users, is they're not in their location where 1,000 people will come up to them and ask questions of them where we're trying to train them. I mean, you've got to make sure you maintain that focus on whatever the product or the solution is, whether it's video, teller cash recyclers, ITMs, whatever that happens to be, or you're just trying to explain the design of something to them. Make sure they have the time to focus on it.
I think Adam and Joey just nailed it. I mean, you know, from my experience involved in projects, and if the first install doesn't go well, it slows down everything. Sometimes you can actually lose the project. So I think Adam made a good point. Just get details. A lot of times you can say, hey, like on the video side, hey, is the video system working great? They're like, yes. And like, you can't end the conversation like that. You can say, well, tell me how you're using it. What do you got to open them up, okay? Because otherwise, if you don't, something's going to bite you later on that you don't want to have.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I learned, and I was on installations with Joey and learned a lot from Joey, was that the training has to be going on long enough that they are completely comfortable with the new process, because they've been doing something for a long time. We come on, we're upending everything. Yes, they've got a manual, and yes, they got training, but tomorrow morning they're going to come in and go back to what they were doing. And I saw that with the recyclers. They take the money out of the recycler and count it twice, handing it to the customer, because that's what they were doing before. And we were trying to shortcut those processes. So they will fall back to what's comfortable. And I think that was a big part of the training, was getting them to the point that the new process was as comfortable as the old one, that they didn't continue to treat the new technology exactly the way they treated the old technology and not take advantage of all the benefits of this new thing that's in their environment. They'd go back to what was familiar. And whether it was just, being uncomfortable, or a mental laziness that they now had to actually start to think about what they were supposed to do next. We'd create jams in the recyclers. They'd know how to fix it, but the minute it jammed, it was like, oh, no, I can't touch that. That's broken, call somebody. And they'd stop using a simple, with a simple jam that they could have cleared themselves. So my concern also became, staying on site long enough especially with this initial implementation, and they're the first ones going through this process, to get them comfortable enough that they stayed with it, even when they were rattled or busy or took a couple of days off and they came back, they would revert back. And I think, Adam, you probably saw that too. When you went back to do training, everybody reverted back to what they used to do. They weren't using the new equipment efficiently.
Yeah, and one of the other things is in our particular product here, I'll tell a lot of them right up front. I said, you will love it while we're here. You will hate it right after we're gone, and then you'll learn you can't live without it. If I set that expectation with them, they kind of understand the process of what it's going to be like and try to work with them on this. And another thing to success is, and I think Dave was talking about this a little bit earlier, is follow up, and Adam was too, follow up with them, ask the questions, because we all forget that, okay, we go out there and we do this training, but then they have 40% turnover in the location. They lose that tribal knowledge that they have gained through, someone like an Adam or a Sonny out there, or their folks out there on site training them. They've lost that knowledge, and now they've modified it in their processes, and the next thing you know, it looks nothing like what they were trying to do, looks nothing like what you trained them to do, and they're wondering why that they're having problems. So you have to follow up with that customer base and make sure that they are continuing to follow what you have tried to instill in them in the first place.
Lindsay, how do you handle that? Because you do a lot of upfront work. What is your follow-up once you do training and you get the implementation done? How do you do that? How do you handle that?
So we schedule follow-up calls for 2 weeks post on site and 1 month after being there. And so we actually kind of set the expectation, and I really do, like setting the expectation in the beginning, and right after we leave, it's going to be uncomfortable. We talk about that as well. But we kind of set the expectation too. One of the big keys in training, if your technology or any solution you're implementing is customer facing in branch transformation, meaning you implement cash recyclers and they have not had them before, customers are going to be asking questions. And so one of the big key components in the training is not just making sure they're comfortable with the process. And I completely agree with what you stated on, helping them think through the new process, because everybody, it's human nature. You revert back to what's comfortable, what's natural, what you know, but how they're going to talk to customers about it. And so if you don't walk them through that and kind of have them get comfortable with, a speed statement to answer a customer's question of, well, why didn't you count my money back to me? You'll have customers that'll push back. And so, with a cash recycler, have them come around the, teller pod and let the customer come and look at it and say, well, I don't have to now. It's actually more accurate than me counting it for you. It avoids the human error. And you want to come see it? It's really great. I can show you how the transaction runs. It kind of blows their mind that they're able to walk back there and, that you don't have cash out and the cash drawer doesn't have those issues anymore. And so we walk through that piece of it, and then we schedule the follow-up in advance. And similar to what Adam was sharing, it's like, we want to hear your feedback, whether it's good, whether it's bad. We really want to know, and we value your opinion. We're always, adopting feedback from our clients and seeing how we can implement better solutions. And so I'd rather them share it with us, than they go and complain to each other about it. And, sometimes we take that same approach. When Adam talked about the blocker, we make sure the blocker is going to be on the follow-up calls, and it's, well, we really want to make sure we get your input. And, we ask, hey, send any notes in advance. If you have an issue, shoot us an email. We'll add it to our agenda and we'll make sure that we have some solutions for you. And when you're asking for that and seeking it, at least you're hearing about it, and it's not just the internal discussions as you go through, and you've already set the expectation that there's follow-up. So they kind of start feeding you information more as you're going through the process.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Sonny also did say that he agreed with what Adam had said earlier about the people and processes that are often missed in the transformation, and making sure that all the impacted players are all on the same page. And help them understand the reason why, this change is happening, and give them the training that gives them confidence in it. And I think that's what we go back to, is they have to be as confident in the new program as they were in the old one. And that's the big key piece of it. So I love the idea of the 2-week and 4-week follow-up, and having, when they know that's coming, that kind of keeps them in, oh my gosh, it's almost like, yeah, I'm going to get graded on this in my participation level and my willingness to go along for this new ride. Somebody's watching, somebody's paying attention. It's not like these strangers are going to go away and leave us with this new stuff and we're just going to go back to what we're doing. Somebody's actually monitoring this and paying attention and making sure I know what I'm doing. And I think there's some discipline in the change management of that aspect of it. So really, really do like that.
So what do you do when you get a situation where you just, right, they're quick to ask for the quote, and man, they actually sign the purchase order and they just think this thing is just, yeah, we're just going to buy this new car and we're going to drive it down drive it down out of the parking lot and down the back home and we'll be fine. What do you do to get them to understand that this is a process, right? This isn't just a new car. You've got to really understand how to drive. And so, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I get involved in projects where our partners will say, well, they're just really not interested in doing, I can't get them on the phone. They're too busy. What do we do in those situations, right? Like you can, the crystal ball, I can look into it and see an explosion because this thing's going to blow up. But how do we stop that?
Adam, I'm going to try talking one more time and see if this works. Sounds like it might be. I think, one of the things, the car analogy is perfect. And I actually use that analogy when I talk to customers about training specifically. You don't go walk into a Tesla dealership or a BMW dealership or buy, spend a bunch of money on a new car and just drive away. Especially something that's unfamiliar. If you don't have a Tesla today and you go buy one tomorrow, you're not going to be familiar with how to operate it necessarily. And you spend an hour or so probably with a delivery consultant who's helping you understand all the features that new car brings you and how to use them, how to maximize the value so that you are a satisfied customer at the end of the day. So one of the things we need to do as branch transformation professionals is help our customer, all their constituents, understand how to use the new technology, the new designs, whatever features we're adding to their branch or changing in their branch to make it more effective and more transformed. We've got to help them understand how to maximize those features. Otherwise, they're not going to be a happy customer.
That's good.
And it is our job to keep them on task with that too, making sure that they go through that process of what Sonny and Adam were saying is you say, okay, here's the next step, training. Whatever that particular product is, we need to go through this process. We need to explain the pitfalls, things to avoid with your people and the technology. All of these kind of things need to be had, and you basically tell them to ensure that we are successful, this needs to happen. It is part of the process, because we get a lot of times where we have customers that said, oh, we really don't need that training. No, it is a requirement with our product. If this is your first time going out, rolling this in, this is part of it. I don't need to be part of an unsuccessful installation that I could have stopped to begin with.
Yeah. I do have a comment from Dave Mai. For TCRs, you should try to explain that the technology increases the customer experience by allowing the teller to focus on the conversation with the customer instead of counting the cash, which again is a good point because they're not focused on the transaction. They can be focused on the relationship. So that's also a big piece of that training. I think some of them went back to counting cash because they'd rather count the cash than interact with the customers, but that's just my 2 cents. All right, well, we're coming up on the end of the hour. So my question for this committee is, where do we pick up on the next session? We'll do another one in another couple of weeks. And what is the next step now? What do we want to talk about? Do we want to go back and talk about the change management and meeting the KPIs and the review with the C-level people? What would you put as the topic for the next session?
Yeah, I think it's, I think we could probably start with a little bit more on the implementation training success, kind of recap that specifically, but and talking about the importance of project management. But the follow-up is critical. So whether it's a 2-week, a month cadence, whatever that process is, but what are you doing on those follow-up calls? What are you physically? What questions are you asking? What are you telling? What information you set as a requirement to come back to you so that you can actually measure success? And how are you going to get that information? So, obviously that's a little bit in my lane from our solution, from our type of solution. I know this is more of a broad branch transformation audience, so maybe we get a couple of different specific solution type metrics and things that we're really hoping to accomplish with a couple of different types of solutions. But that's just a suggestion. That sounds great. All right, Adam, you just stepped up. I'm going to work with you on that, and we'll get ready for the next session. I'd like to thank the committee, thank everybody for their time and the effort to be part of this today. To our 28 attendees that we had, thank you for joining us. And we will be back with more information soon. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.